go ahead and conduct the Q&A now.
Thank you. Hello. I can't believe this is the closest anybody's ever been to the screen, so I apologise. So I saw Black Swan once, and it was a weird cinema in London, and the seat was here. So I know what it feels like. It feels pretty tricky to sit. But does anybody want to ask any questions, or are we just going to look at me and make me feel weird? So,
I'll go first. I mean, these films are a lot about, you know, the sound design and the editing, and I'm interested to know about that process. And also, are you going to be around also after the screening? Because I am here, I'm a contributor at both Fangoria and Rue Morgue, and I want to get a hold of my editors about your film.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was a really intense piece of work, but yeah, if you could talk about the sound design a little bit, because I noticed there was very little of no soundtrack, which is just kind of striking me now. And then, of course, the editing really made everything pop. So.
Oh, thank you. I mean, yeah, the editing was, I'll start with that first, because it didn't come before the sound design really, but we had like 50 hours of material, because it was, like I said, the way we shot it, the process was, you know, the actors didn't know the story. Obviously the baddie, Max, he knew the story, and he was the puppet master, and he was the one who did the website, and the slightly, you know, there are some horror tropes in there which are a bit hokey, like the cabin in the woods, you know, the bunnies hanging up. That's him, that's not me, and you know, I just want to get over it. And I think, so he knew, but the others didn't know. So when we came to the editing, we had 50 hours of a jigsaw puzzle, but no picture on the box, which was slightly agonising, to say the least. I think my editor still exists, but we haven't spoken for a while. But it was so subtle. It was like every little nuance, because if you know, it's like every time we try to match up a scene or an expression or even a bit of dialogue, we didn't have the correlating, you know, words, and so we had to build it as we went along. So it's kind of like we had several versions, and they kept changing, because literally you have her face looking scared slightly too early, and then everything would fall apart. So it was long and painful, but actually quite. It's more like doing a documentary. It's like pulling sync for a documentary and building.
Did you cheat the dialogue in on like?
We didn't. No, I stupidly, and I really regret this, and he hates me for it. I made a rule which we wouldn't lift shots or even, you know, moments, reaction shots from other scenes, and that became really agonising, because it was stupid. It was like, you know, how to, you know, crucify yourself. But the dialogue, and again the dialogue, we changed some scenes around, but if we did that, we did it wholesale. We didn't take bits of dialogue or move them. And we actually only had like 9 lines of ADR in the end, because we found we couldn't get back to that, you know, being in the moment. So the ADR is in there. I can still hear it painfully, because it's tonally just so different, because they weren't genuinely scared. They were in a, you know, recording booth in Soho. But 9 lines out of however many there are, it's not many. Sorry, I'll quick. The sound design, yeah, I mean, it's massively important to me. I'm a bit obsessive about it, and Julian is someone who I've worked with for many years, and he's done, you know, he's a brilliant, brilliant sound designer. He's done anything. He's done, you know, Hot Fuzz and, you know, films with Edgar Wright, which are very much Shaun of the Dead and stuff, which are very sound design as well. So he's someone I trust and love, and it became an essential part of it. To the extent that we probably showed it too early to some people, like the executives, because we showed it with, you know, me making stupid noises and clapping and stuff. And it, you know, the music is actually, and you're right, doesn't seem there's much composition, but you're wrong with respect, because Rowley Porter, it does sound design in his music. So, for example, he's just done a project which is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and he was asked to do that, and instead of doing the whole thing, he did the first note for half an hour, and he just breaks it, and he puts it to subsonics until it just falls apart and there's no note left. So what you're hearing is kind of a marriage between a very experienced sound designer and Rowley, who's never done film, and the two of them just worked on sort of sonic range, which was, I think is just amazing. I mean, I think, you know, yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, this is a great cinema, but we've had other ones, like there's Dolby in London, and their subs are kind of really painful, and it's like, you know, like again, he was saved slightly from this, but yeah, I was really pleased. I won't answer that quite as long each time, I do apologise.
I don't know if this is so much a question as I was going over in my head, more as just a compliment to you and the sound design team. It's, there's an old saying, when something bad is walking through the woods, every alarm bell in the forest goes off. But when something really bad is coming through, everything goes dead silent. And part of the greatness of this soundtrack is the use of silence, which so many horror movies, honestly, that's why you can't even call most horror movies, is a total lack of suspense in part because of the soundtrack, and they completely never use any silence. It's very refreshing to see the use of silence here in this film, and I guess my question would be, how tempting was it to use a loud noise for every single jump? Was there ever a temptation for that?
Yeah, there was. I mean, there's a version which I could show you, which is just pretty awful, which is, you know, got all those. And like I say to the gentleman there, it's like I didn't. All I had in my box was sound effects from other films. So we struggled to find a new sound for a scare, and that's why Rowley was so good, because he put it in bits. You know, the sound scares are composition rather than design. Actually, those little bits are. And, you know, the first time we had it, we used bits from other films, and it's just, you know, so I get it, yeah. And the science is terribly important to me. I think it, you know, there's a gentleman earlier actually who asked, previous guy, I can't remember who it was, about is it horror or is it suspense? And I think I thought it was an interesting, wherever it was an interesting question, because I ask the same sometimes of myself. You know, when you use a horror trope, especially in the sound, does that make it more horror just because you're using that, or is it the silence, which is not in horror, that makes it more horrific? So I think that, you know, it's an interesting question, that. But you know, for me, the biggest moment came when we put the car. You know, obviously we put the noise of the car, an engine running the whole way through at first, because we had to lay it, and it destroyed it because you just had what was actually a purring sound. So it's like sitting with your pet cat, and you're like, that's not scary, it's just reassuring. So we bring it in and take it out. There's some scenes where there's no car noise, and there should be, but there's not. So it's an endless, and I love it. I'm excited by it. So, but thank you. Sorry, lady in that.
So you said you switched things around in the editing, but did you originally shoot it in what you thought would be sequential order, and how many shooting days were there?
It's shot completely chronologically, which is why we only did 2 weeks rehearsal because the characters only knew each other for 2 weeks. So I was quite strict on that. Oh, sorry, that won't work, will it? And so, you know, I made sure the actors didn't know each other more than their characters did. So we rehearsed just for 2 weeks, then we shot chronologically, and that's why there's an awkwardness at the beginning, which I think is, you know, in a scripted film it would look weird, but I think we get away with it because they look as though they're entering a real relationship. And then the whole thing's chronological, and that was 4 weeks, so two 11-day fortnights, which is what you shoot in England. So it's pretty quick. I mean, there's a lot of coverage, but and then I think it's only the middle section actually. It's when the guy appears and watching them and the scarecrow and all that. That's the only bit that we moved around because their reaction, for example, their reaction to the clothes had to be calibrated to the reaction to the man standing there. The man having the wee was too far away. And then there were logic questions, which like how did the man get from here to here? And we tried to sort of solve all those because I think, you know, again we brought other people in because it became obsessed with, you know, the logic of it and could he be in these places? Because I think there's pretty much, you know, it's not like a haunted house movie where you're kind of like just go and stay in the fucking hotels. Like, I think we kind of kept fairly. The only time that they could have escaped, which is when he's done the knife trick and, you know, the betrayal game, and he then runs away. If they'd stayed in the car, they could possibly have got away. But that's the whole message of the film. I mean, is you know, violence is the mother and the daughter, and that's the moment when the boy Tom gets out to hit Max. And if he hadn't have done that, they probably could have got away. So apart from that, we kept pretty tightly. So we were pretty much tied into the structure that we had, except when they forced me to change it because they were at a different emotional pitch. If that makes sense. Bye.
You used so much of the car, like as far as like mirror shots and window shots. Was that something that you wanted to do in advance, or was that something that just kind of happened as far as like getting a lot of like window shots and mirror shots?
The first thing I wanted to stay outside. They were the only. It's very static, when they're outside the pub, and it's a very traditional scene which was delivered. And that's the only one where you're actually watching dialogue outside. And then when we go into it, I wanted to stay within the car as much as possible. And this is bizarre perhaps, but except when we were trying to get inside the head of her. So the shots where you come outside and look at her are looking at her sort of interior landscape, if you like, which is a flip. Other than that, I wanted to stay tied to the car as much as I could, because one of the marketing people, it's not a bad thing, it may never be a line, but it's home invasion in the car, which was always I was curious. I wanted to see if I could pull off a movie in the car. It's easy to sell to executives because it's cheap, and if you can find the number of shots that you can keep it fresh, and then I think it works. And I think I watched Duel, Spielberg's Duel, and one of the geniuses of that is that he introduces a new angle every sequence. So it's you tie yourself into that. You say, okay, there's the rear view mirror shot, the classic one. I was like, well, I can't use it yet because I know I'm going to need it when the man gets in the car, so I'm not going to use it now. And every sequence had a sort of palette of shots and angles, and I added a new one every time, which is, greater man than me inspired me to do it. But I think that helps I don't know what you feel. I feel you don't get bored of being in the car.
No, I thought it was great. All the angles are fresh and stuff like that.
Okay, cool.
And you do feel like you're in there, and almost like you're being invaded when stuff starts going on.
Yeah, I think that the kind of the camera. Sometimes we rigged up cameras and they went off on their own, and that's the roughest footage you can see. That was the Canon 5D, and we had to send them off. Then there were other times when we had the cameraman and me in the back of the car. And that actually helped because the symmetry of us in the back and the two people in the front made it awkward for them. They kind of felt imposed on. So we kind of moved it around, and then sometimes the DP, which David Katz-Nelson, was kind of wedged into the between the dashboard and the windscreen. So they were acting properly then, because obviously they had a big bloke sitting on the gear stick, which is always weird. Anybody else? Right. Okay.
One more follow-up. After you say you wanted to see if you could make a movie in a car, Duel is the easiest go-to. It's part of kind of a two-part question. Did you look at a lot of other automotive horror films like Hitchhike or The Car, Race with the Devil, and also what did you learn as a director shooting like that?
I think it's really interesting. I think. Duel, I said that's what I learned from that, really relevant to this. And then beyond that, actually, I did look at other films in cars, and what I found was that, my background way back is documentary, so I'm very aware of the relationship, and the DP as well. I've done, he's done documentaries, and there's a kind of way of finding the story when you're that kind of camera and using your eye in that way. And that hadn't really been done in all the movies I saw. There was much more of a traditional, flat, classic film image. So we, tried to shake it up in that way and change the angle. So, and then also the technology meant a lot of those films you mentioned are made before the advent of small cameras. We had those small cameras at our disposal, so we could literally get one here and the eyes and everything. So, the grader is a brilliant colorist. And he was able, we used 3 mediums, and he was able to kind of match them. So that made the difference with that. I learned as a director, basically just to, with that, don't try and replicate, just try and do what you feel is, appropriate in the moment, and still some good ideas, but then reapply them. I think, rather than, there's lots of, Collateral, it's a great looking in-car film, but I didn't use one shot that they used, and that was kind of conscious, really. Even though they did it on a similarly, an adapted small camera. It was interesting process that. And also drive. I mean, we did. That's a beautiful, stunning, one of the best in-car camera work, and we just didn't have the. Bizarrely, we looked at it and we like, our cars in England are just small. We can't. So the wide shot and drive, we'd actually be in the field on the side, so it didn't work. Sorry, anybody else? Yeah.
I was really glad that that whole bar group was kind of a red herring.
Sorry, I
And
can't
was
hear you.
gonna be- Huh?
I can't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was glad that a group at the bar was kind of a red herring. Was that always kind of a plan to kind of use them as like a side focus? Because I was going to be mad actually if it was just a group of guys from the bar and they were upset.
Yeah, no, there was. I mean, I think you would have been rightfully very angry with me. I think that was a very deliberate red herring, and I think, essentially, I wanted to say, it's about trust, and it's about as humans, are we able? Where do we find suspicion? How does fear drive us into suspicion? And is ultimately conflict and violence to follow? And so the classic thing, the deliverance model is obviously the locals, doing it, and that was absolutely from the word go. That was a very clear thing, and you can imagine I had to defend the fact that I was never going to film in the pub, because obviously a lot of, on paper again, if you saw it as a script editor or an executive would probably say, "Where's the scene in the pub?" And that's the whole point: is that scene is never filmed and you never see it, because actually it's completely innocuous. Tom went into the pub, Blake spilled a drink, and he brought him around, and that was it. I had one executive who believed the psychopath, who said, "Why is Tom being lying about it?" The psychopath. And I was like, "Hold on, you're believing the sociopath, you're believing the sociopath." And he's like, "Yeah, so?" So I think there's, it was a deliberate red herring. They're just an innocent bunch of guys having their asses because two strangers came in. It was again, it's like, there is an element of emasculation. There's a lot of films about the power shift, about emasculation and role, having a kind of ideal of what you think you should be in certain situations. So a bit of trouble goes on in the woods. I've got to be a knight and save the day. And then so a lot of it's like that. And I think the boy is a great. He's skinny. He understands being an alpha male, but he's certainly not an alpha male. So I just wanted to represent these blokes as a way of setting it up. So it was there are several red herrings, but that was again. Do you want the microphone this time? So you said a lot.
No, I forgot to myself. When it comes to that villain, when you're directing a character who is acting like a sociopath, and the way the story's framed, that they're going to win regardless. However the story's going to turn out, they're going to win. What is it like directing a character like that? Is that a challenge in itself over other characters, or not really?
I think very much so. I mean, I think it's it's really tough, and I don't know what the collective people feel, but it's like, because it's a difficult character to do. We've had great ones in different eras, Norman Bates, Max Cody, or whatever. So it's really hard to approach that. And to be honest, we pitched 3 different levels. We pitched the kind of De Niro and Cape Fear version, and there are takes of that. We had the kind of Jim Carrey in Anything version, and then we had the kind of played down version that you see. So it was difficult because I needed to see on the day where to pitch it. So in answer to your question, I didn't come into the shooting of this with the absolute certainty of where to pitch it. It was only when he started that we could then discuss it and bring it down accordingly. But then in the edit, again, we calibrated it so we had different, pitches. But it's really tough. I wouldn't want, to be honest, I'd never do a sociopath again. I think it needs to just, whether Heath Ledger was kind of one of the best recently, and we kind of want to leave it now. I don't know. Killer Inside me, Casey Affleck, I think that's a brilliant one, but I don't know where I would go if someone came to me with. Actually, I have after this. I've got a Ted Bundy story knocking around, but I don't know if I would.
Let's take one more.
Sure.
Are there any scenes you filmed that you really liked but ended up cutting for continuity or for time restrictions, and were there any alternate endings?
There were no alternate endings. That was an ending I wanted to have from the word go. There were lots of scenes, and it wasn't for continuity. It's really just they weren't interesting enough, and they didn't move it forward in the right way. Like I said, there was 50 hours of footage. You'd normally expect, I don't know, a ratio of 10 to 1, I suppose, really ideally. So there was a lot of stuff, and most of it, I mean, there were a couple of scenes that I really liked, but they didn't work in terms of, there's a really good one when they were walking around before it got dark, but when we put it together, it didn't feel right that they were out of the car at that point, so that went. There was another one which was a branch fell on top of the car, and it was a good jump, and it worked as a jump scare, but it wasn't better or worse than the other one. Actually, it was slightly worse, than the ones that were coming later, so that went. So there's always a good reason why they went. It wasn't, too painful. There's one bit that I actually loved, but which did go, which was only because it kind of upset the balance. But I wish I had kept it in a way, but you would have been asking another question to me, which is why did I keep it in?
Thanks for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your evening.